We're learning the Sikha on Parshas Bechukosai in Chelek Chav Beis on page 166. The Shir today is being learned Lil Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Koltman. This Sikha is also a Hadrin on Masechta Erchen, and the Sikha will be discussing the Gemara at the end of Masechta Erchen, which discusses the halacha of a Zdei Acherem. What is a Zdei Acherem? So when it comes to being makdish, declaring any property that you have that it should be given to hektish, you makdish something, there's a unique way of how you could be makdish something, which is called to be machrem, cherem. Generally, cherem is a term that could be actually used in a negative context, as the Rabbi will bring later. But cherem means you want to separate or not associate with something. And when a person declares his property to be cherem, so the halacha is as follows. If you just declare it to be cherem, it then will belong to the kohanim. If you specify, so then this property, if you say you want it to be a cherem for the Beis HaMikdash, it becomes cherem hektish to be used for the funds of the Beis HaMikdash. Or if you other specifications, then the cherem will take place as you specified. But a stam cherem, the property will go to the kohanim. That's the halacha of the cherem that the Rabbi will be discussing here in the Sikha, and more specifically, the discussion in the Sikha will primarily be regarding a kohen, his ability to declare a property of his as cherem. When you learn the Mishnah in Erchen, it seemingly and simply says that this way of declaring something hektish, by declaring it as a cherem, is not possible for a kohen to do regarding his properties. But here though, based on the Gemara in the end of Erchen and the Rambam, the way he brings this Gemara, the Rabbi will prove and explain how and when even a kohen can declare his property as a cherem. Now the Sikha here opens actually with another halacha regarding hektish, and this is the regular hektish of a zdei achuzah. Now what does this mean? A person owns a property of inheritance in Eretz Yisrael, and he declares it hektish. What happens with this property? Hektish is not in the business of real estate. So what happens with this is either the person will redeem it back and pay the money in exchange for this, and the Beis Din uses the funds for whatever they need it for, or someone else will redeem it from the hektish, in other words, buy it off of hektish, or it remains in the possession of hektish. So the halacha is, if the person did not redeem his property back, someone else redeemed it, or it remained in the property of hektish, when Yovel comes, the 50th year, where in this, or actually last week's parsha, in Parshas Bahar, we learn about Yovel, that's the year when all properties that were sold are returned to their owner. What happens to this property that a person gave to hektish when the year of Yovel comes and he did not redeem it? It's still in the possession of hektish, or perhaps someone else redeemed it. It does not go back to the original owner like all properties in Yovel. That property will be released from the one that bought it or from hektish, and it will be granted to the kohanim that are serving at that time of the Beis HaMikdash. That's the unique halacha of a zdei achuzah, a property of inheritance that a person was makdish when the year of Yovel comes. It goes out and gets distributed to the kohanim. That's the halacha that the Rabbi opens up within the Sikha here. And then, as I said, the Rebbe will go into the siyum of Masechta Erchen. There's a lot of new halachas that I'm sure you'll be learning here throughout the Sikha. As we go along in the Sikha, I'll try to explain as much as possible every detail of what the Rebbe is talking about here. So let's begin. When one declared a property of his inheritance to be hektish, so now this is a property that's owned by the funds of hektish, und hat es nicht goel gewen, and he did not redeem it. Oder der Gizber hat es verkauft zu einem anderen. Or what happened was, the caretaker, the Gizber of the hektish, sold his property to someone else. What happens now when the year of Yovel comes? Steht in Pasuk, the Pasuk tells us, V'hoya hasada b'tzeisa b'Yovel, kodesh l'Hashem. It'll be with this field, when it leaves from the one that has it now, the year of Yovel, it's going to be kodesh l'Hashem. What does that mean, kodesh l'Hashem? Kistei acherem l'koyin tia achuzasai. Similar to the zdei acherem that, as mentioned before, when you declare a property to be cherem, it belongs to the koyin. Similarly here, in the year of Yovel, this property will go to the koyin. It will become the koyin's inheritance. As es geht der Reise the koyinim, this property leaves from wherever it is now to be by the koyinim, by Yovel in the year of Yovel. Punkt wie es der acherem was wird gegeben zu koyinim. Just like the Stei HaCherem that belongs to Kohanim. See him in the last piece of the Gemara in Erchen, stellt sich the Gemara of the Werte, the Gemara there stops on the words of the pasuk, Kisdei Acherem Lakoyen Tia Chazosai. Like the Sdei Acherem, this property that was declared hektish and was not redeemed, it goes out in Yovel to the Kayin as well. Frek, the Gemara asks, Ma Talmud Loimar. Why did the pasuk have to say these extra words of Kisdei Acherem? It could simply say that it goes out to the Kayinim. It would be understood. Why does it have to make this comparison to the halacha here, that it's similar to the way it is with Sdei Acherem? Was lernt Sdei Acherem if I felt was Yetze L'Kayinim b'Yovel? Those words Sdei Acherem, what is the teaching regarding this property that in the year of Yovel goes out and is given to the Kayinim? So the Gemara says as follows: Minayin L'Kayin shehiktish Sdei Charmai. How do I know that a Kayin that owns a property that he received from another Yid that declared it to be Cherem, and now this Kayin got it, and this Kayin now wants to take this property and give it to Hektish? He's Maktish it. So this Kayin shouldn't say as follows: since this property that's now in the possession of Hektish, if it remains in the possession of Hektish, and Yovel comes, what happens? It gets released from the Hektish and distributed to all the Kayinim, as we just learned, the halach here regarding any property in the possession of Hektish at the time of Yovel, it goes to the Kayinim. If it wasn't redeemed when the time Yovel comes. This property that the Kayin is being makdish now, he got it as a Sdei Cherem, it's now his, like a Sdei Achuzah, like any other inheritance that this Kayin owns. And right now it's in my possession. I'm being makdish it, but right now I have it. So teheshali, so let it be mine. When it goes out in Yovel, let it be mine. Let it not go out to all the Kayinim. Usually when Yovel comes and the property is released and goes to the Kayinim, who does it go to? It goes to the group of the Kayinim that were serving in the Beis HaMikdash at that time, when Yovel comes. But here this person says that it should go out to me, that I should be the one receiving it. Now, V'dinu, furthermore, he says there's a logical reason why we can say with a Kal V'chaimer that it should belong to this Kayin himself. Bechel Acheirim Ani Zoiche, if there's a property that belonged to someone else, any Yid that was Makdish's property to the Hektish, and Yovel comes, and this Kayin happens to be serving in the Beis HaMikdash, so I will get a portion in this. Astei Achuzah from Yisrael is Yetze L'Kayinim b'Yovel. Hoya L'Chelik Bo. This Astei Achuzah of a Yid that was released in Yovel that the Kayin receives. So b'shalatzmi, if this is a property that I myself am being makdish now to Hektish, like Kol Shekain, so most definitely I should also get this property for myself. That's what a Kayin may argue and say. Talmud Loimar, that's what the pasuk here is teaching when it says, V'hoya Sada B'tseisa b'Yovel Kodesh L'Hashem, the property of Hektish when it leaves in Yovel, it's Kodesh, Kisdei Acherem Chulu, and it says that it belongs to the Kayin, and it compares it to the Sdei Acherem. Why is the Torah saying this? Ba L'Lamit. It compares the Sdei Acherem simply as a source to compare where we find an example of a property that belongs to the Kayin. But V'nimtza Lamit. But it actually then is coming to teach us. We learn from this Sdei Achuzah by a Yisrael that's distributed to all the Kayinim, that we compare back and say that the same would apply over here to this Sdei Acherem that the Kayin is being makdish. Makdish Sdei Charmai l'Sdei Achuzah. We compare this Sdei Acherem that the Kayin owns to the halacha of the Sdei Achuzah. Shal Yisrael of a Yid. Ma Sdei Achuzah Shal Yisrael. Just like the halacha of the Sdei Achuzah of a Yid. When a Kayin not as girl given von Hektish. If a Kayin was the one that redeemed this from Hektish. As mentioned before, the Hektish owns this property, and anybody can come and redeem it from the Hektish. But then what happens when Yovel comes? Even if it was a Kayin that redeemed it, it gets released from his hands at the time of Yovel, and it's distributed to all the Kayinim that are serving at that time in the Beis HaMikdash. The same will apply regarding a Kayin that's being makdish, his Sdei Acherem that he has. When Yovel comes, it leaves from the possession of this Kayin, and it's distributed to all the Kayinim. This Kayin himself does not keep it. That's the halacha that the Gemara says in the end of Erechim. Now here the Rabbi brings the Rambam that it seems is quoting the halacha of the Gemara. The Rambam pasken, so the Rambam rules as follows: Kayin shohaisaloi zdei cherem, a kohen that has in his possession a stei cherem. Now, how did he get the stei cherem? Shezocha ba achara yovel. He got it after the year of Yovel. Now that needs clarification. What does it mean he got it after the year of Yovel? So let's wait and see. Vehachrima, and now this kohen decides that this stei cherem that I own, I want to go ahead and be machrim it. Harei zu muchremes. It takes effect, it becomes muchram. The status of cherem takes effect. V'yoytze le'echav ha'kohenim, and it goes out, it belongs to his brothers the kohenim. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, la kohen tia achuzosai, that for all the kohenim will be his property of inheritance. Right before that, it said in the pasuk, chistei cherem, la kohen tia achuzosai. So we compare and we learn out melamid shesdei charmoi loi chistei achuzah Yisrael. That the stei cherem that the kohen owns is similar to the stei achuzah. And therefore we say here as well, she'im hechrima himuchremes miyad, that if the kohen decided he wants to declare a property that he has as a stei cherem, he wants to go ahead and further declare it as a stei cherem, it will immediately take effect to be a stei cherem. And what will happen to it? It will be distributed to all the kohenim. That's the halacha, the way that Rambam quotes this. Now, this is the Rambam that the commentaries say is quoting the halacha of the Gemara that we just learned. Now, it's pretty clear to see that there are certain things that the Rambam says here that are different from the Gemara. So the Minchas Chinuch asks over here on what the Rambam rules. Aleph number 1, from Vanet nemt the Rambam. What's the source of the Rambam that he says, as the din yoytze le'echav ha'kohenim, that when we speak about the fact that a kohen that owns a stei cherem in his possession, and then he wants to be makdish it, that property will later be distributed to all the kohenim, is oich when the kohen at machen gewen stei cherem. That this includes also a case, not only when a kohen is declaring this property to be hektish, with the usual term of makdish to declare hektish, but he's specifically using the term of cherem. He's declaring it as a cherem. Sorry. From where does the Rambam take this, the point that he says there, different from what the Gemara says, that the kohen owns the stei cherem, and now he wants to again declare it to be a stei cherem? The Gemara redt doch nur when a kohen hikdish stei cherem. The Gemara speaks about a kohen that's declaring hektish stei cherem, not taking his stei cherem and declaring it again to be a stei cherem. Where did Rambam take this from? Furthermore, the question here is, a kohen can garnet machre sein. A kohen with the possessions, the properties that he owns, does not have the ability, using this term of cherem, to declare it to be a stei cherem. Wie the Mishnah sagt in Friedig and Perek, as the Mishnah says earlier in the Perek there in the Gemara in Erchen, HaKoyenim v'ha-Leviyim ein machrimim. The Koyenim and the Leviyim cannot declare something that they own to be a cherem. The ganze din cherem is nit shaykh by Koyenim Leviyim migzeres hakosov. There's a pasuk that it's learned from that what the Kohen owns should be his forever, and he can't declare it to be cherem. Und es ist kein Afgeminnet wegen welcher Feld es redt. There's no distinction of what status of what kind of property you're talking about. See, this is given Zaine from Frier, whether this is something that he had from before. There are those cities that the Kohenim inherited in Eretz Yisrael that the Eibishter gave them. So that's something that the Kohenim always owned, that is. Other erot is bakum shpete based on shul, or it's any property or possession that he received at a later point. Doesn't seem to be any distinction. Why not? Because varam afil metaltlin. This halacha that a kohen can't declare anything to be cherem applies even by movable items that he owns. Wie the Mishnah sagt, as the Mishnah says clearly, and wie the Rambam allein paskint in halacha shalachrize, and as the Rambam clearly says here in the next halacha, karka oy metaltelin shal kohenim or leviyim, whether it's properties or movable items that belong to the kohenim or leviyim, einon machrim memaisam. They don't have the ability to declare it as a cherem. So that seemingly implies that if metaltalim, which is something that they could buy and get at a later point, but they can't declare that to be cherem, so then that should apply also to this property that the kohen received now as a zdei cherem. He can't go and further declare it again as a cherem that it would be distributed to other kohenim. So the Rambam is saying something here seemingly against the clear Mishnah in Erchen. What's the source of the Rambam to say that, he can't be machrem any properties that he owns from before, but if it's a property that he received from another yid as a stei cherem, this he could declare as cherem. What's the source for such a distinction? The other question here is, what's the source of what the Rambam says at the conclusion of the halacha When this Kayin declares this stay Cherem that he has as Cherem, he muchremes miyad. It immediately becomes in this status of Cherem and it's distributed to all the Kainim. Where does the Rambam take this from? In Gemara that blows the month as Yotzin le'echav HaKainim, the Gemara says that this property that he declares to be a stay, or the Gemara talks about when he's makdish it, as pointed out before, that it'll be hektish, and then when Yovel comes and it gets released from hektish, then it leaves and it goes to the brothers of Kainim. V'nishne v'nishlash b'loshen zeh. The Gemara repeats this 3 times, that it goes to the brothers of Kainim when Yovel comes. Es steht aber nicht in Gemara as man lernt heraus, but in the Gemara nowhere does it say that you learn from here that the Kayin has the ability to be machrem, a property that he got as a stay cherem, and when he's machrem, that cherem will take effect immediately, and therefore will be distributed to the brothers of the Kayinim. The Gemara never says a halacha. Gimel, the Lashon Harambam betchilas halacha. What the Rambam says in the beginning of the halacha when he speaks about the fact that the Kayin has a stay cherem in his possession. Where did he get it from? That he got this property after Yovel. Sounding like that a Kayin only gets a stay cherem as a result of Yovel. Is in ganz nicht verstandig. It's completely not understood. Yovel hat kein Sheiches nicht zu Chermei Kainim. The year of Yovel has no connection to the fact that a Kayin could have a stay cherem in his possession. A Kayin is Zeiche in the Charamim ständig. A Kayin will always be Zeiche in a Zdei Cherem that a Yid declares to be Cherem. As mentioned before, that's the halacha of a Cherem Stam, that it goes to the Kayin. Sai Lefnei HaYovel, Sai B'Yovel, and Sai L'Achra HaYovel, whether this is before or during or after Yovel. Und wie der Rambam paskin b'halacha shel Lefnei, as the Rambam brings this in the halacha right before this halacha here. As the Chermei Kayinim, Harei L'nitnem L'Kayinim Shebayis Mishma B'Shah Shehechrim. That the Cherem is, Chermei Kayinim are, anytime a Yid declares his property to be Zdei Cherem, whoever is serving the Beis HaMikdash at that time, when the Cherem was declared, it goes to that Kayin. So why is the Rambam here saying that the Kayin got this property of a Zdei Cherem after Yovel? This is the 3 questions here of the Minchas Chinuch. So the Rabbi attempts to answer some of the questions. Siv Beis and Siv Gimel, one question, another question. And Volke can sagen, it would be possible to say, this is mashma from Mefarshim, as it seems from the commentaries here on the Rambam. As vehechrima da, when the Rambam uses the expression that the Kayin has the stei cherem, and now he wants to further go and be machrim it again, meint the Rambam nit chermi kayinim. He's not referring to being machrim it, meaning to give it to that it would belong to other kayinim, as the halacha of a regular stam cherem is. Nor cherem lebedek habayis or cherem l'shamayim. We're talking over here when a person declares it and specifies that he wants it to be a cherem to be used for the funds for the construction or what's needed for the Beis HaMikdash. Or cherem l'shamayim, not for kayin, but he says specifically it should be for heaven. Was euch wegen sei retter in der halacha shel Lefnei zeh. About this distinction that it depends on whether you declare the cherem for this specific use is also mentioned earlier in the Rambam. And the Rambam says kayin shehoiselei stay cherem. So here, referring to the Rambam that we're learning here, halacha vav, kayin shehoiselei zdei cherem shezocha ba'achar Yovel. When the Rambam says that a kayin now has a zdei cherem in his possession, and he only got this zdei cherem after Yovel. Why did he only get it after Yovel? Meint euch as zdei cherem lebedek habayis. What the Rambam is referring to is a property that was declared cherem, but they didn't go to the kayin because he specified that it should belong to the funds of the Beis HaMikdash. And then what happens when Yovel comes? Then, if it wasn't redeemed ever, it remained in the possession of Hektish, and Yovel arrives, then the Kayin is the one that's Zeiche in this. And that's the property that the Rambam's talking about. But this answer, though, this answer is not smooth in the language of the Rambam. In addition to the question that still remains, the question here is, Vanet is the makkah from them din in Rambam. What's the source of this halacha that the Rambam says? That we're talking here about a property that was declared as cherem for the bedek habayis, and then it was released in Yovel. That's not what the Gemara is talking about. The Gemara is talking about a kayin that has a property of a zdei cherem, and he's being makdish it. It's just a different case. Where did the Rambam take this from? It's from Siyum l'shainai, but besides it's in the language of the Rambam himself. In the conclusion of the words of the Rambam here, he says, Melamed shestei chermoi loy. That the pasuk here teaches that the stei cherem, his stei cherem of the kayin, will belong to him, like as dei achuzah. which means actually that it has to be distributed to all the Kainim. But the expression that Rambam uses is stay chermai, meaning how does he have this stay cherem? Not because it was given actually as a cherem for Bedek Habayis, and then only by Yovel it became his. Rather, it's mashma as a redwegen cherme Kainim, that the Rambam is speaking about a stam cherem, which is a cherem that goes directly to the Kainim. And that's what the halach of the Rambam is about. So the question comes back, how could the Rambam say that this zdei cherem is only zoiche in following Yovel? A stam cherem goes directly to the Kainim. The Rebbe attempts to answer another one of the questions here, the third question, Sifale from Minchas Chinuch, that the Minchas Chinuch asks on the Rambam. This question that we just addressed here, actually. The same question that Rebbe is going to try to answer now. Why does the Rambam say, Shezocha ba'achara Yovel? Is mashma von anderen Mefarshim. So from other Mefarshim it seems, as mitiverte, Shezocha ba'achara Yovel, when the Rambam writes that he got this property only after Yovel, meint the Rambam an ander fall, the Rambam here means another case. It's not supposed to be read together. Und se darf stehen, and therefore it has to be written in the Rambam. There's a word missing here. Odes is keilu, wie the Rambam volt geschrieben, or the Rambam is writing short, and it's as if the Rambam wrote, Oi shezocha bo achar Yovel. There's one case where the Kohen owns a stei cherem, that he got directly from a Yid that declared it to be a stei cherem, or another case, a property that the Kohen got following Yovel, which is a stei achuzah shel Yisrael, was the Yisrael at makdish given only pada, as the case in the opening of the Sikha, where a Yid was makdish a property, and wasn't redeemed from Hektish. When Yovel comes, that goes to the Kohen. It's the second case. Now, was demot is Yotze l'Kohen and Yovel, the Kohen receives his property in Yovel. Now, in both of these cases, is Oich HaZafeld, can the Kohen machrim sein, the Kohen can declare this to be Cherem, Shemechrimim Mechremes Miyad. As soon as he declares it Cherem, it becomes Cherem for all the Kohenim. So it's two different cases. But if this is the Pshat, and the Rebbe accepts this Pshat, but the question here is, was is the Rambam medayik und makdim kohen shoysel stei cherem? So why, when the Rambam wants to talk about a case where a kohen owns a property, does he begin with the case of a kohen that owns a property that he got as a stei cherem, directly from a Yid? Und additionally, besim l'shaynai is the limit from pasuk zokte nor balamin shestei charmaylai. When the Rambam brings the limit of the pasuk that a kohen has a power to declare a property that he has now, that he got either by a stei cherem. And the Rambam before mentioned, according to these commentaries, another option, that he got it from a Zdei Achuzah from at the time of Yovel. But later on, though, in the conclusion, the Rambam only mentions the limud of the possibility to be machrim by a kohen, that he has the power to do this with his Stei Acherem. If there are two different possibilities of how the kohen got this, why is the Rambam not mentioning that? It seems like there's something unique here with the fact that the Rambam wants to highlight this Zdei Cherem that the Kohen now got from a Yid. And the language at the end, Stei Charmai. What is this? Okay, now going back to the first question that the Rebbe brought before, that the Minchas Chinuch asks. In the Etzem Shailoi from Rambam, regarding the question itself on the Rambam here, the main question here on the Rambam, that the Rambam seems to be saying a halacha which goes against the clear Mishnah, as Kohenim ein machrimin. A Kohen cannot declare any property of his to be Cherem, and it doesn't matter what kind of property this is. That's what it seems. It's a Gzeres HaKosef. And this is going to be actually the main focus of the Sikha. Voltman bepashtus gekent empferen, so simply you could answer as follows. L'das HaRambam is dos was Kohenim ein machrimin karkois. The Rambam's opinion is that the fact that a Kohen cannot declare any property he has to be a Cherem is nit stam a Gzeres HaKosef. It's not just simply a decree of the pasuk, which would mean adin in gavra, a halacha that applies to the kohenim themselves. As by kohenim is nitah the ganze din fun charamim, that regarding the kohen, this whole mode of being makdish something with the language of cherem does not apply. When they use this language for the kohenim, it's meaningless. Is nitah the ganze din charamim, nor says adin in cheftze. Rather, this is a halacha that only applies to the actual properties themselves. That these properties that are in the possession of the kohenim, there's a limitation regarding them that they will not be affected by a declaration of cherem. And as this is, you can see this, that this is exact and precise in the words that the Rambam says here. In the Mishnah is the Lashon. When the Mishnah says this halacha regarding the Kohenim, it says, HaKohenim v'haLevim ein machrimim. The Kohenim and the Leviim cannot declare any other properties to be Cherem. So the Mishnah is clearly speaking about the Kohanim and Leviim themselves, saying that there's a Gzeres HaKasav, taking away their ability, like Yidden, to use this expression of Chedem to declare something to be Chedem. But in the Rambam schreibt, however, the Rambam says Karka, or Metaltlin, not talking about the Kohanim and Leviim themselves, talking about the property or the movable item, Shel Kohanim and Leviim, that belong to the Kohanim and Leviim, Eina Machrimim Oisam. They are excluded of a Chedem taking effect on them. That's the way the Rambam puts it. Okay, so now based on this, whether the Gzeres HaKasav relates to the Gavra, the Kohanim themselves, that they are out of this ability to declare Chedem, or the Gzeres HaKasav refers to the Cheftze, to the property itself, we could actually say that there's a big distinction here, and it's not even a Gzeres HaKasav. This is something that applies uniquely to the Karka Metaltlin, a specific kind of Karka Metaltlin. The tam of them is, the Rambam is mamshech. What is the reason why, if we say that this is just a halacha that relates to the actual properties, the cheftza of the properties themselves, what is the reason why they are excluded from this ability that they should be affected by the declaration of chedem? So the Rambam says, the pasuk says, that the properties that the Kohanim own is an achuzas olam. It's a everlasting inheritance that Hashem gave them. But state by Arei Leviim. This is a pasuk that's written by the cities that the Eibishter gives to the Leviim and the Kohanim in Eretz Yisrael. So we see here that the point is that the Eibishter wants this to remain theirs forever because He granted for them these cities, and therefore they don't have the ability to be machrim them. Und der Rebbe is der Din Dafke bei Sodos, wir sind be'etzem Zeire mitzad Nesimis HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If that's the case, we can say that this only applies to those properties that is theirs only because they got it as a gift from Hashem. The Sodos in Arei Leviim und was Yashim Avim. The properties that are from the cities of the Leviim that Hashem gave them and that they inherited from their ancestors. These Sodos is neshayach as mezol ze machrim sein. It's regarding these properties that you cannot declare them chedem, to give them up in that way, because it's supposed to be achuzas olam. Because then you are nullifying, taking away the status of it being an inheritance for them. And the Torah says that this should be an everlasting inheritance for them. But a property astei chedem that a kohen has received as a gift, this stei chedem that a kohen receives is not an inheritance of his. This is something that not the Eibishter gave you this portion here. Someone else gave this to you as a gift by declaring it chedem, and it goes to the kohen. So this is something that the kohen does have the ability to be machrim it. Okay, so that's seemingly an answer for the Rambam. Again, if we would say that the halacha that a kohen cannot be machrim is a gzeres hakosov for the gavre, then there's no exceptions to this. The language chedem has no effect when a kohen says it, regardless of what type of property it is. But if it's a halacha only relating to the cheftze of the karka that the kohen owns, then we could say that this only refers to those properties that he actually inherited and received as a gift from Hashem. But not this dei chedem that the kohen received from a yid. Here, because it's not an achuzas olam, you could be machrim it. So now the Rabbi says, "Das is aber l'chayre euch nit maspik." This explanation for the Rambam, though, is not yet sufficient. In other words, the Rabbi is accepting the basic point here that according to the Rambam, this is a halacha pertaining to the cheftze, the properties themselves, and not excluding the kohen, the gavra, of this possibility. However, the explanation given here for the distinction regarding this dei chedem, that this dei chedem is excluded from the regular properties that a kohen inherited, and they could be declared as dei chedem, the explanation given here is insufficient. Because according to this explanation, is das was der kohen can machrim sein. The fact that the kohen has the ability to declare chedem, these properties that he received as a chedem, is this nit weil sistei charmai. It's not because of their status that he has, that this is the kohen owns it as a stei chedem. The fact that it came to him by the means of a stei chedem that a yid gave it to him, that's irrelevant. Nor was he is nit achuzasai. The main point here is it's not an inheritance. Nit achuzas olam shaloi. It's not his inheritance that Hashem gave him here in this city that Eibishter granted to the Kohanim and the Leviim. That's the main point there. So now this doesn't fit into the language of the Rambam. Hat the Rambam gedacht madgish sein. So if so, the Rambam should be highlighting here this point. The Rambam shouldn't be saying that the kohen that owns a property, and he got it, how? Because it's a stei chedem. That's not the main point. The fact that he got it by a stei chedem is irrelevant. Nor as a sretzach wegen a karka, was is nit a chuzah. The Rambam should be saying a kohen that owns property, and it's not one of those properties of the cities that Hashem gave the kohenim and Leviim, or he inherited from his ancestors. He's able to declare it chedem. It's not excluded from this din of chedem. And the Rambam should be using a language something like this: kohen a kohen that now owns property that he got from a yid in any way, regardless of he got it as a stei chedem or in any other way, or some similar language that Rambam should be saying. Why is the Rambam specifically highlighting and saying that the kohen now has a stei chedem in his possession, and he's able to be makdish, or rather, he's able to be machrim, that is, this stei chedem? Seems like there's something unique about the fact that the Rambam is highlighting the fact that he got it through being a chedem. Besides the language of the Rambam, that doesn't seem to be making this point, this distinction, this explanation we said before. In addition, in the etzem svara, as the chedem is chalv and the soda is nitach chuzasei mamish, the very idea here that we explained, that the chedem takes effect, even though a kohen cannot be machrim, but here regarding this property, the chedem does take effect, because this is not a property that the kohen received as an inheritance, rather it's only a chedem. That distinction, tzarechiyim. It's difficult to accept this when you look in how the Rambam says the drasha that he quotes actually differently than the Gemara. And let's see exactly what the Rambam says here. The limod wie the Rambam bringt the hekish stei chamoy to stei achuza. The Rambam brings the hekish that the Gemara says, that we learned, that we compare the two things that are brought together in the pasuk, where it says, again, the pasuk brought in the beginning of the Sikha, where it says, "V'haya asad b'tzeisa b'yovel kodesh l'Hashem, kizdei achedem l'koyen tia achuzasai," comparing the stei achedem and the achuza. So how does the Gemara brings this drasha, right? So if we look at the Rambam, the way he brings this drasha comparing this stei chedem to this stei achuza is betoichen hafchi wie it is in Gemara. The Rambam actually brings it with an opposite approach than the way it is in the Gemara. Why is that? The Gemara sagt, what the Gemara says is, makish techarmei l'sdei achuza shel Yisrael. We're comparing the stei chedem that the kohen now wants to be makdish to the halacha of the stei achuza that a yid is makdish to hektish. Just like the stei achuza that a yid dedicated to hektish, when Yovel comes, it gets distributed to all kohenim. The same with the stei chedem, that the kohen will be makdish. He's not going to get it. It'll be distributed to all kohenim. So what is the Gemara here referring to in this hekish? This haste. What this means is melanent up stei charmai from stei achuza shel Yisrael. What we're comparing over here in the stei chedem that a kohen has to the stei achuza by a yid, welche der kohen hat peide gewen men a hektish, which the kohen redeemed from hektish before Yovel came. A yid was makdish to stei achuza, and then a yid came and a kohen that is came and redeemed it. As kshein vi darten is das nit seine. The point here is that it will not be his. Und sie is yetze mitachas yadai. He will have to give it away when Yovel comes to all the kohenim. The same as with the stei chedem that he declared to be hektish, and when Yovel comes, it'll be released to all the kohenim and not to him. So the comparison over here is regarding the fact that he does not have the possession and the power over this stei chedem, similar to the stei achuza when Yovel comes. In the Rambam is the lashon. The Rambam, however, when he makes this comparison with the drasha of comparing the stei chedem to stei achuza, completely different. This comparison is teaching me stei charmoi loy k'stei achuza Yisrael. This is teaching me that the stei chedem that the kohen has now in his possession, that he does have now, is treated by him, has the same status as the stei achuza. But mashmusa is, it seems like what the Rambam is actually saying, the bailus of stei charmoi, the Rambam is focusing on the level and the status of the ownership that the kohen has on this stei chedem. Punkt, wie stei achuza Yisrael, that it's similar to the stei achuza of a yid, the kind of status and definition or the nature of the ownership that a Yid has over any property of inheritance, similar, a Kayin that has a Stei Cherem, the nature of his ownership is the same. That just like a Yid could be machrim this property, so too a Yid, a Kayin that is, could also be machrim this Stei Cherem. That's the drasha that the Rambam seems to be saying. So this is completely different than what the Gemara says. It's not talking about when it leaves in the year of Yovel, who does it go to, that this Kayin will not receive it. On the contrary, over here we're speaking about when a Kayin has this Stei Cherem in his possession, the nature of his possession or an ownership over it is similar to the nature of the ownership of the Yid, that just like the Yid could give it away, it could be machrim it, so too the Kayin could be machrim it. So if that's the case, the Rambam is not at all saying anything of what we said before, that the Stei Cherem is different than the Stei Achuzah that a Kayin inherited. The Stei Achuzah he cannot be machrim. The Stei Cherem he could be machrim. The Rambam seems to be saying something completely different. That the drush of the pasuk is teaching me that we compare the nature of ownership of the Stei Cherem to a Stei Achuzah of any Yid. Just like the Stei Achuzah of any Yid, he has the power to declare it to be Cherem, so too the Stei Cherem of a Kayin, he has the power to declare it to be Cherem. The Kayin has the power to declare it to be Cherem. So the question though is, how can we make this comparison? If the Mishnah says, and we learn from another pasuk that no, we do not compare the Stei Cherem of a Kayin to the Stei Achuzah of a Yid, because by a Stei Achuzah of a Yid, he has the ability to declare it Cherem. A Kayin is excluded. So why is the Rambam over here saying that we compare these two? Okay, so the focus over here is, let's take one point of all of this, what the Rebbe is going to focus on answering the Pshat in the Rambam. We clearly see here in the Rambam that even though there is a halacha that a Kayin cannot declare his properties to be Cherem, or even metaltlin, even movable items as well, however, there's an exception here. When the Kayin owns a Stei Cherem, or if he got this property after Yovel, when it was released from the Hektish, that kind of a property, the Kayin could declare as Cherem. But the explanation for why this is not clear. The explanation we gave here in Sif Dalet is not the right explanation, as we can see from the language of the Rambam and the way the Rambam says the Hekish. So what is the basis for this distinction? So we could say that the explanation for all this is behaktim was the chinuch is masbe the sharshe mitzvah von dinei charamim. By first quoting what the chinuch says regarding the root of the mitzvah of charamim, what is behind this mitzvah, what is the reasoning behind this mitzvah. So the chinuch here says as follows: the Yisrael hu ha'am asher bachar akeila v'dasai. The Yidden are the nation that Hashem chose to serve Him, olahakish shmai, and to recognize Hashem's name. And they are not under the dominion of any of the constellations that Hashem has given or has placed as being in control over all the other nations of the world. The Yidden are under the dominion of Hashem Himself, without any intermediary of any angel or any other constellation. As the pasuk says, Ki Chelek Hashem Amai, Yaakov Chevel Nachlasa, Yidden are the portion of Hashem and they are His inheritance. So therefore, Loi Tanuach Bem Rak Toive B'Shefa Broche, it will only rest upon Yidden goodness, a flow of blessing, V'Ruach Nedivo Tara Tismechem, and a spirit of generosity and purity will be there to support Yidden. Yidden are under this umbrella of Hashem's goodness. Anything that's the opposite of this, this includes anything that's cursed or anything that is cherem. Now, cherem means something which is removed, or usually it's even used in the terms of an excommunication, something that's completely separated. This is something that can be possible only by those that are the enemies and hate Yidden, but not by Yidden. By Yidden, there's nothing in their possessions and their properties that can have this kind of status of being in a level of me'era and cherem, something which is cursed. So therefore, when a person gets angry or under any duress, and he utters out of his mouth an expression regarding his properties that cherem, which means I separate this from me, I don't want this. And they are really just blessed because it belongs to a Yid and which belongs to Hashem. So really this expression cannot have any effect on the properties of a Yid. The pasuk here tells us, with this kind of declaration of cherem, which is negative, you cannot remove it from its possession of blessing in the property of a Yid to another possession. If you should call Asheli Yisrael, everything that belongs to a Yid, Shem Chelek Hashem Yisbarach, which is Hashem's portion, Loihu, it belongs to Hashem. Umashakana Eved, Kana Rabbi. What a servant owns, the master automatically owns, as the halacha is regarding an Eved, that whatever he owns belongs to his master. So the Yidden being Hashem's servants, whatever Yidden own belong to Hashem. So therefore, really, the declaration of cherem should not have any effect. So now what is the halacha of cherem, though, here, that the pasuk says, when a Yid declares something cherem, it does become holy and it's distributed to the kainim. However, since we know and see the truth here, it was the intention of the one that said this expression, that I don't want this property. His intention was to take it out of his possession. It's the right thing to fulfill his desire, and let it be returned to his master, which is to Hashem, and it should become holy, belonging to Hashem. Since this was his desire, so therefore it will take effect. And how will it take effect? Not in the negative sense in his declaration that he said out of the rest and used this negative term of cherem, but actually the effect will be that it will become holy and it will belong to the kainim. It's based on this idea that our sages tell us, that we learn from the pasuk, any properties or even movable items that belong to the Kainim or the Leviim, they do not have the possibility to declare what they own as cherem. What this means is, if a Kain or a Levi declares regarding his property, that it should be cherem. This does not take effect at all. Why not? So based on what the Chinuch explained before, he says now, because the Kainim, the Leviim, they serve in the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore whatever they own is also there, like it dwells, it's in the house of the master, the place of blessing and kindness and goodness. Whatever he owns, it belongs totally to Hashem. In a place of blessing, there is no place for this declaration of cherem, which simply is a negative thing related to a curse. There's no place for this kind of declaration by something that's owned by a kayin to take effect, God forbid. That's the explanation of the chinuch. So now here, the Rebbe will explain, it's not very clear why there is a distinction between a Yisrael and a kayin. At first glance, the words of the chinuch are not understood. That it's nicht verstandig der Chiluk zwischen a Yisrael, was kann machrim sein, und a Kain the Levi was ein machrimen. What's the explanation there why a Yid can declare it cherem, and even though the cherem is something which is negative, but yet, since this is his desire, it will have an effect in a positive sense that it will become hektish. But a Kain and a Levi, they use this negative word of cherem. Since it's a property of blessing, this term cherem will not take effect. What's the difference here? Oich by Yisrael, as the Chinuch says, even by a property that's owned by a Yid, is doch ein mokem lecherem chalila. There's also no room for the negative effect of the cherem to be on his property. As the Chinuch explained earlier, a Yid cannot take his blessed property that has a connection to Hashem to another possession that's outside of that. It says blois, but then the Chinuch though explains, since we see that with the word he said, it was his intention to separate it and disassociate from this property, even though he said it in a negative sense, but nevertheless, it's the right thing to fulfill his desire that it should be disassociated from him. And what happens to it? Positive. Let it be returned to Hashem and let it become holy. That's how it works with the property belonging to a Yisrael. So why shouldn't we apply the same by a Kayin? Why shouldn't we say the same? When a Kayin or Levi declare cherem, a property that they own, that the negative effect of this term cherem will not be, but rather since it was his desire to separate it from himself, what will happen is it will become holy, only positive. So why shouldn't we say the same by the Kain? Even though the Kain, yes, whatever he owns belongs to Hektish, but by a Yid also, whatever he owns is also in the possession of Hektish, or in the possession of Hashem, as the Chinuch says. Nor der Chiluk is. So the difference, what the Chinuch is saying here, the difference between a property of a Yid that you could declare Chedem and a property of a Kain that cannot be declared Chedem is as follows. The Chosim von Yisrael, when it comes to the properties of a Yid, their connection that they have by the fact that we say that this is considered to be within Hashem's domain, it's Hashem's portion, is nit mitzad unen ze gufe. It's not because of, and as far as the very property itself is concerned, that it's within the place of Hektish, it's dwelling in a place of Hektish. That's not the case. It's owned by a Yid, which is a private citizen doing his thing outside of the Beis HaMikdash. So what is its special connection that it has to being in Hashem's possession? No mitzad Yidin. It's because of who the Yid is. Mashakana Eved Kana Rabbi. Because the Yid is a servant of Hashem, so therefore whatever he owns will ultimately be owned by the master, by Hashem. But the actual property itself is not considered to be a property which is in the Chelek of Hashem, like it is by the Kayanim, which serve in the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore everything they have is in the domain of Hashem. But by Yidden, that's not the case. So therefore, is Chotch, es is nitchal der inyan achedem, heipach habroche ala nachosim. So even though the point of chedem, which is negative, opposite of blessing, that cannot take effect on these possessions, not as vert kaidish. Rather, when one declares chedem, what's going to be happening is it's only going to become holy. His negative expression that he said chedem out of duress, it will not take effect that way. It'll just be positive. But the question though is, this negative term that he used, chedem, how could it take effect at all? If he said a term chedem, and that term chedem cannot have any effect on this property, and what happens then is it only becomes kaidesh, but there's sort of something over here that's disassociated from what the person was saying. He was saying chedem. The person was under duress and said this negative expression of chedem. That doesn't take effect. Instead, it becomes kaidesh. But in order for it to be possible for us to say that we switch from the term chedem that he said to it actually being kaidesh, there has to be some ability for the term chedem to have some association with this property. So therefore we say as follows. True in actuality, that term chedem cannot take effect on a property of even a Yid because it's the Chelek of Hashem. So therefore it becomes kaidesh. But to be baltover, but since however, as das was the Teire is das meisim reshusai. The reason why the Teire is allowing for his words to have that effect, to take it out of his possession, is sibasa kavanas hamachrim. The cause of this is the intention of the person that used the term chedem, the chafetz shebelibai, and the desire in his heart, which originates and is expressed with the language of chedem, was erat genutzt, that he says, which has a negative connotation. Now, so why does that have any ability to even begin to have any effect with this property? It's because these properties, as far as their very status in itself, what they are, there is room for this negativity in this language to have an association with. Because the very properties themselves are not in the domain of Hektish. It's in the domain of a private Yid. It's just that them, by an extension, because the Yid is a servant of Hashem, it belongs to Hashem. But the very property itself is just a mundane property. So the negative connotation in the term chedem that he used to trigger this hektish is something that could connect or could associate with this property. Is chalal kaponim the shem chedem of dem feld. So therefore, the expression of chedem that was used could relate to this property. And furthermore, on the and also the opposite of blessing that comes out as a result of using this expression, which is the opposite of blessing, will also have an effect there. Regarding the person that declared it with this term of chedem, and the fact that he loses it, that now it goes out from his ownership, so there's something negative here that's happening. The Yoshev, and the Yeh Kaidish, and then it returns. What happens is it doesn't actually take effect to be something negative, but what actually takes effect is that it then becomes holy and it goes back to Hashem. So again, the point there that the Rebbe is saying is that what actually happens when you declare Chedem is that it becomes holy. Because it's a property that belongs to a Yid, that belongs to Hashem, and therefore it's impossible to take it out of its place of blessing, to declare it Chedem, that it should become something negative. However, though, what triggers and what begins this process is by the language that he used, which is with the term Chedem. So it only if this is a property that has some aspect of it that term of Chedem, the negative term of Chedem, has an association with it, that name, that term Chedem has an association with this property, is the term Chedem that the person used able to trigger then that it should take effect, that then it should be applied in a positive sense to be Kodesh. This property is called a stay Chedem, so even though later it becomes hektish, which is only positive and only holy, and it goes to the kayanim, but yet it's called as dei chedem because it was triggered by this term chedem. So the inyan of chedem, which is the actual negativity in that term, is not what's going to actually be happening here. However, there has to be some association with the term chedem in order for this to be able to be triggered, in order for this to be able to then cause that it should become hektish. And therefore, by Yisrael, that's possible because the property itself is something which is not in the Chelek of Hashem. And mitzadatzmai, the actual property itself. So now we understand that by the Kayin and Levim, this is not possible. The actual physical properties themselves, they are, since they belong to the Kayin that serve in the Beis HaMikdash, it has a different status. It's like these properties themselves are within Hashem's possession. The place of blessing, kindness and goodness. Whatever a Kayin owns belongs to Hashem. The properties themselves belong to Hashem. So over here, regarding these properties, there's no association at all to any term of chedem, the negativity of the chedem at all, relating to the Kayanim and the Leviim. Because these are properties that are completely, utterly godly. They belong to Hashem. So therefore, you can't have that original trigger to connect to the negative term used there, to then apply it, yes, in a positive way later, that it becomes hektish, but you have to have that original trigger that there should be some connection here to this negative term used regarding this property. That is impossible by a property owned by the Kayan Melavim. Now, the point that we see here, that we take out from what the Chinuch says, is that as long as there's some level of Shem Chedem, of the term Chedem, that could be associated with this property, the term Chedem will take effect. The truth is, even by a Yid, the real inyan of Chedem, the negativity of Chedem, cannot be applied to his property. And we're not going to be applying it, it's going to become holy. But as long as there's just an association of the term Chedem that could be applied to an aspect of the property, that's the link that's good enough that will allow for the cause of these words Chedem that are negative to trigger that it should become hektish. Now with this, the Rebbe will explain why even by a property that's owned by a Kayin, a stay chedem that the Kayin received. So again, the question before was that a Kayin cannot declare a property chedem. That's a clear Mishnah in Erechem. But nevertheless, there's a distinction. The Rambam holds that there are cases where even a Kayin can declare a property chedem. Now that we understand what is that root over here of the idea of what you need in order to be able to declare something chedem. Because really, in other words, the whole concept of declaring a property chedem is a chiddush. Because chedem is a negative language, and it becomes hektish. So there's a chiddush over here that it becomes hektish, and that's by the fact that there's an association to this term of chedem. So usually by kainim this is impossible, based on this reason. But there's an exception that the Rambam is teaching us here that it is possible even by a kain, because the shem chedem will be able to be associated to this property even though it's in the possession of the kain. So let's see. So now that we understand that the fact that a Kayin cannot declare something to be Chedem is because on the property of the inheritance of the Kayin, this negative term of Chedem cannot have any association with it. The Ribber is a Kayin Yisrael. So therefore we can understand now. But if this is a Stei Chedem, a property of Chedem that a Kayin received as a gift from a Yid, so here there is a certain element, a certain aspect of the existence of this property where it could be associated with the term of Chedem. The Kayin got it from a Yid that used the term Chedem to affect it. Can chal sein of ir dem shem cherem. So if so, we could say that this term of cherem could trigger and bring about an effect regarding this property. Even after it enters into the possession of the kain. Even though now it belongs to the kain, and whatever belongs to the kain is completely holy. But the original status of this property, which is a property that belongs to a yid, where the term of cherem could be associated with it, that doesn't change, and therefore even now when it's in the possession of the kain is able to also trigger a hektish by using that term of cherem. That's the basis of the distinction of what the Rambam says here. Similar as Asadish Yisrael a property of Yisrael that he was makdish, and then the kain got it following after Yovel. Was the achuza is nit given sheichim beis adainav. This is not a property of inheritance of the kain that belongs to the kain, and therefore is considered to be that it dwells in the house of the master, in Hashem's house, in Hashem's possession. Ubemele is in ir given an afsharius as these nechem vernadei Yisrael. So therefore there is a possibility that the term of cherem should have an effect on this through a yid. Bleibt die Efsharius euch, wenn die Sode kommt zum Kain. This possibility remains even after the property comes into the possession of the Kain. Now, again, the point of here is we're not looking for a situation where there's actually a real connection to this negative term of cherem to this property. The truth is, even by Yisrael, that's not the case. But there's a certain aspect of the property that has a connection to this term cherem. So the negative term that the person used will trigger something regarding this property. So therefore we can extend that and say the same thing regarding the property which is in the possession of the kain. That even if, yes, this property does not have an association with the negative term of cherem, but there's some aspect of the property that does have an association with the negative term because it originates from the yid and which could place upon this the term of cherem. It's not originally by the kain completely in the reshus of Hashem. So just that aspect of the property, whatever it may be, that it associates with the term cherem is enough to now say that regarding these properties, the kain could declare it as cherem. And this is what the Rambam is learning from the pasuk Shenemar Lakoyin. That's when as the pasuk there says Kizdei Acherem Lakoyin Tia Chuzasai Melamed Shestei Charmoi Loi Kizdei Chuzasai LiYisrael. That this pasuk is teaching us that the Stei Acherem that a kohen has the same status as the Stei Achuzah of a yid. She'e Mechrima, that if he declares it cherem, it takes effect. He Mechremes Miyad, it becomes cherem. As the Soda Hotadin via Stei Achuzah LiYisrael. That this stei cherem that the kain has the same halacha as the stei achuzah that a yid has. Nit v'achuzasai shel kain, and it's not like the property that a kain inherited that he cannot declare cherem at all. Das was the stei cherem. Adu di sada shezacha ba'achar hayovel is muchremes. The reason why this property that the kain got from a yid as a stei cherem, or he got it after yovel, it originated from a yid. So and now the kain could go ahead and declare it as cherem, and it'll take effect. Is nit azoi mitzad shlila. The reason for this is not only because of the what it does, what it's not. Going back to the idea that the Rebbe suggested before, that you may say that the reason is because Hashem does not want the kain to declare it cherem because He wants it to remain the kain's inheritance forever. And these properties are not that. They do not have that status of being a stei achuzah. It's not only for what it's not, nor rather, based on what we explained there, mitzad achiyuv. It's because of the positive aspect, the actual aspect that this property has, because this is a property that has an aspect of cherem to it. This is a property, talking about the first scenario that Rambam says, that the Kain himself got this because of another yid that declared it to be a stei cherem. So there's definitely a strong association with this property to the term cherem. That's how the Kain got it. It has the name cherem on it. The Sadat got the Efsharius from cherem. This is a property that had the possibility of cherem through another yid canal, as explained before. So therefore, so therefore this property, even after it comes into the possession of the kain, it doesn't now have the status like a property of inheritance, which is a property that's thoroughly and completely in the possession of Hashem, and there's no association at all to the term of cherem, and therefore that term will not take effect. If a Kayin will declare Cherem to this property that was a stay Cherem that he received from a Yisrael, so we see that this is a property that the term Cherem could be applied to it on some aspect of it. So therefore, if the Kayin now will want to be Machrim it will take effect as well. So this explains the question that I've asked before, why the Rambam highlights, even though the Rambam brings two possibilities, that it could be a steicherem that he got from a Yid, or the property that he got after Yovel from Hektish, but the Rambam highlights mainly the steicherem, because the steicherem highlights this point over here, the association that this property has with the term cherem. And that you see that more when it's a property that has the names deicherem. So therefore, this is the source of this idea that even the Kayin can declare this property to be Cherem and it'll become Muchrim Miyad, it'll immediately take effect. And das is the Chilok from the Hekish in Gemara. With this we understand the difference of the way, the comparison, the way it's brought in the Gemara. In the Gemara, it's a completely different drasha. The Gemara says, "Mas de'achuzas shal Yisrael yitzim mitachas yado mischalekas l'kayin." The Gemara that is talks about a property as de'achuza that a person was makdish, and then it by yovel it leaves hektish and it gets distributed to all kayinim. Af stei charmai, so to the stei acherem that a kayin was makdish yitzim mitachas yado mischalekas lechav kayinim. It's distributed to all Kainim. That's what the Gemara learns here. On the limud and Rambam. And then when we look at what the Rambam is learning from the Pasuk, it's completely different. In Gemara is the limud as a bleibnit Zaina. The Gemara is coming to say that this day Cherem, that the Kain is being makdish, not declaring Cherem, being makdish, and it becomes hektish. So then when Yovel comes, it does not remain this Kain, this individual Kains, nor mischalekas lechav Kainim. When Yovel comes, it's distributed to all the other Kainim. In Rambam is the limud, but the Rambam though is focusing on a completely different halacha and is learning something completely different out from this. Shestei char mailoi kestei achuza. The Rambam learns out from this that a kohen that now has a stei cherem in his possession that he got from another Yisrael, it will have the same status as a stei achuza Yisrael. That as a stei achuza that a Yid owns, that he has the ability to declare it as cherem. Shemachrima hi muchremes miyad. That if he declares it cherem, it becomes cherem right away. That's what the Rambam is saying here. Muchremes miyad. He's not talking about what happens when it gets distributed after Yovel. The Rambam is discussing, does a kohen have an ability to declare cherem? And the answer is yes. In these two cases where he got it from a Yisrael, he does. As is chalif Shem cherem, says Yitzim Rishusai, the Shem cherem takes effect and it leaves his possession. And Zvert Kodesh, Bechukosai Guf, and then there's a level of holiness that comes upon these properties. That's what the Rambam is saying, totally different than what the Gemara is saying. Now, where did the Rambam take this from? And the Rambam nimmt das heraus von Maskanas HaGemara. The Rambam takes this from the conclusion of the Gemara. There's a discussion there in the Gemara regarding this halacha, the way the Hekish is brought originally there in the Gemara. And the Gemara there actually asks, why would we think to say that a kohen that takes a steicherem that he has and is makdish it, that when it's released to Yovel, he should get it all for himself? Why should he get it all for himself? And the Kayin says he's learning it out from the fact that if another Yid gave a property of Hektish to Kayin, and then by what happens Yovel, it goes to all the Kayinim. If the Kayin himself, is being Makdish, when it goes up a Yovel, for sure I should get it. But it's not the same. By the Kal V'Chomer, in a case where another Yid is Makdish, and it's released in Yovel, who gets it? All Kayinim, not just him. So why is he thinking to say that he should get it? That's the question of the Gemara there. And the conclusion of there in the Gemara is that that this hekish here, that it says in the Pasuk, comparing stei charmai to the stei achuzasai, is actually teaching another halacha. And the Gemara says, I would think to say, ki achuzas olam hu lahem. It says that this is a property of inheritance forever. So ha nami achuzasai. So I would think that this is also an achuza that is his forever. Kamash Mulan, achuzasai in charmai. This, that it's his forever, is only the achuza, but not charmai. So the Gemara there is clearly saying that the drasha is coming to teach us regarding the halacha of achuzasailam. That we say that the Eibishter gives the Kainim their cities, that it should be theirs forever. This halacha, that these cities should be theirs forever, is only regarding achuzasai. But charmai, not regarding the stei cherem that the kohen has. So what do we see over here in the conclusion of the Gemara? As mekom pe'ike shoylo zayin, as charmai vet nit achuzasai. So the point you see from the Gemara is that a property that a Kohen owns because he got it from a Yid as a stei cherem does not become completely his like a property that he inherited. What's the significance of the difference here, relating back to the point that Rabbi said before? A property that a Kohen has as a stei achuzah, the Chinuch says, is totally in the possession of Hashem. There's no association with the negative term of cherem that could have any effect on it. A property that a Kohen that is, got from a Yid by declaring it a stei cherem, this does not become the Kohen's completely. Even after it becomes the Kohen's, there's still some aspect of what that property was when the Yid declared it cherem that's still here. And therefore, there is an association of cherem with this property that could be applied to this property. Is chalev dem the din b'shem cherem, and that's the basis, the source of the Rambam, that the name and the term cherem could have an effect on this property. That's the source of the Rambam in the Maskana of the Gemara. These are the last words actually in the Gemara in Erchin. So this concludes the main hesber here of the Sikha regarding what the Rambam is saying. What's the basis of the halacha that the Rambam says that there is an exception where a kohen could declare cherem. And higher, the Rabbi continues, Vehine l'chayre is das achidish. What's being said there is very novel. To come up with a new explanation for this halacha that a kohen can't declare cherem, and we're bringing a reason and explaining a new pshat and the reason that the Chinuch says. And based on the reasoning of this din, to be mechadish a new chiluk and halacha which is not mentioned anywhere in Gemara. In the Mishnah, it just simply says a kohen cannot declare cherem. It seems like there's no exception to this. But now, looking deeper into the din of why that is, we would just machadish a new distinction here that only applies to a stei achuzah of the kohen from his cities, but not from those properties that he got from Yisrael. So this is something very unusual to take a reason like this and to create a new nafkamina lahalacha because of a reason of a din. Why are we doing this here? So this is something which is unique to the nature of charamim, which belongs more broadly in the category of the inyan of erechin, where a person accepts upon himself to give a certain value of what he owns to hektish. As das ist bescheiches mit dem, was die Dines der Achuzens der Cherem sind in the Parsha and in the Masechta Erechim. This is because we're talking here about the subject of stei cherem or stei achuzah, which a person declares cherem or hektish, which is all included in the general Parsha and the Masechta of Erechim, where we talk about how you evaluate something a person wants to give to hektish. Was called inyan erechim, the entire concept of how you go about someone that declares something hektish is verbunden mit tam v'seichel. This is all based on our analyzation and our assessment of what exactly should belong to hektish and what not. Mishatzt up, as you see, the halacha regarding erechin is you have to evaluate vifus is the shivoi funa zacha mi ben esrim vad ben shishim. The Torah gives us the different ranges of ages of what the value of a person that declares that he wants to give the value of this age bracket to be hektish from the age of 20 to the age of 60 and so on. And then what would be the value of the ages when it is by a female. So these are all various different evaluations and assessments regarding what is included over here in the term that was used to be makdash something. And also their value and what they are in the years earlier than what was mentioned here or later on. The erech adam, the value of a person, the kohen has to come and use his mind to see and evaluate what was meant here with this dedication, with this pledge. The erech behema, and also to evaluate the value of an animal that was being dedicated. The erech hakohen. So we're talking here about a kohen that's using his knowledge and his assessment, his intellect, to see how this should take effect, what he does owe, what he does not owe in this pledge. That inyan atam v'atas. Furthermore, this idea that this is all based on the awareness and the seichel of the person is da zeiful negeya is something which is so relevant here, not only regarding the assessment of the kohen to assess what the yid now owes with this pledge, but furthermore regarding the person that made the pledge. Biz severet halacha gleich betchilas mesechta erechin. This is a halacha that is right in the first Mishnah of Erechin. Hakol ma'arichin. Everybody could be ma'arich. Everybody could dedicate the hektish by dedicating a certain value. So what is this? The hakoil, the term hakoil lasuya mai. What is this coming to add? Lasuya mufle samachlish. This refers to someone that's at the age of 12 and older, even though he's not yet a gadol, but he's old enough that he has the knowledge and understanding of what he's saying, so the halacha of Erechen applies to him. Wie bald as the ganze Iyun von Erechen is verbunden mit Tam v'das. The whole Inyan of Erechen, this mode of declaring something hektish, is all based on assessing and evaluating what this value is, and it's only possible to pledge if you are aware of exactly what your pledge is all about. That's how it takes effect. That's what's unique about the Erechen, and more broadly, including this also the Stei Achuzah, Stei Acherem, which are various options of how a person can be makdish something to hektish. Similar, we apply also regarding the Charamim. It's in the same parsha, this week's parsha, and in the Masechta of Erechen, as the Gedarim v'dinim shelahem zenen nitkin zeres hakosef. When we look at the things that define these halachas of Charamim and the halachas, the dinim, it's not just to be taken as a gzeres hakosef, where the Torah declares and decrees this is a halacha, when it could take effect, when it doesn't take effect. No mitzadatam. These halachas here are unique in the sense that we should apply our evaluation and assessment logically, whether it should or should not take effect when the Torah. So the same here, the Rebbe learned the Rambam. So therefore, the Rambam applies this approach as well here. The Rambam understands the conclusion of the last words of the Gemara in Erechen. Kamash Malon achuzasai in char meiloi. When the Gemara says that there's a distinction between the achuzah, that property that the Kohen owns, that he got from the cities, and Cherem, which is the properties that he got as a stei acherem from another Yid that gave it to him, that it's different. What does the Gemara really mean to say based this? As das is verbunden mit dem Tam miyuchad, was is da bechermet. The Gemara is not simply saying a drasha from a pasuk as a decree, as a gzeres hakosef with no reason. But the pasuk is actually teaching us over here something logical, that we should distinguish between a property that he owns from before and the property that he got later as a stei acherem. As the Rabbi explained before, the logical reason for the difference. And that's how the Rambam brings out here and teaches us this new halacha that we understand from this, as chermoi ken a kohen yeh machrim zayin, that a property that the kohen got as a stei acherem, he can declare this as cherem, even though by a stei achuzah that he owns from before, he cannot. Here the Rebbe concludes this inyan, focusing here on the last point regarding the nature of these kinds of pledges that one makes to hektish, and also the stei cherem, that this is all based on the evaluation and the assessment logically of what's included in this. That this is connected to a story with Rabbi Parasha. He says, Yudua the Sippo mit Rabbi Parasha. It's known, the story of Rabbi Parasha, that was a chassid of the Mittler Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek, that Zayin the Kayim Geman, when he was yet at a young age, had gewollt sehen the Malten Rebbe. He had a desire to see the Alter Rebbe. Und hat bei sich gehad zugegräht Akashe, Masechta Erechen, auf zu fragen dem Alten Rebbe. So he came to a place where he thought he would meet the Alter Rebbe, and he prepared a question in the Gemara in Erechen to ask by the Alter Rebbe. Wie noch der Alter Rebbe ist reingegangen in ein Zimmer, wo Rabbi Hillel hat sich gehad behalten. As soon as the Alter Rebbe walked into the room where Rabbi Hillel Parasha was hiding there, hat Rabbi Hillel gehört, wie der Alter Rebbe sagt, benigena Yedua. And he heard that the Alter Rebbe that saw with Ruach HaKodesh that Rabbi Parasha is there, and the Alter Rebbe said with a famous melody that he would say things, as a young man, when if a young man is here and he comes to ask me a question on Erechin, darf frier sich meidig sein. Let him first evaluate himself. In other words, let him first evaluate himself of what he's doing, how he's serving Hashem. That's what the Alter Rebbe said, and Rabbi Parasha immediately fainted, I believe the story goes, and he didn't get to meet the Alter Rebbe ever. As das is given a hira to Rabbi Hillel lemeshach kol yemei chayav. What the Alter Rebbe said here to Rabbi Hillel was actually a lesson and a guidance to Rabbi Hillel Parasha for his entire lifetime. And as we see this and the way in his behavior in his life, ki yudua de anhaga from Rabbi Hillel, and it's known about Rabbi Hillel Parasha's behavior in hidurim und zehirisim beyaser. He was extremely scrupulous regarding mitzvahs, and also very extremely careful regarding anything that may be associated with any aveda to a very unusual degree. And this was based on what the Alter Rebbe told him, that he should evaluate his actions, his behaviors, and so on. Now, however, seemingly looking at the life of Rabbi Hillel Parasha, of who he really was, now, based on what we said before regarding what the Masechta of Erechin really represents, so seemingly they don't fit with the life and who Rabbi Hillel Parasha was. Is doch der Ein von Erechin verbunden mit Tam vaskala. Erechen is a Masechta that's uniquely expressing the idea that a person has to use his intellect to assess or to have an awareness, to know exactly what he's doing when he's pledging. Und der Ikke Meile wie Yisroel von Rabbi Hillel, on the other hand, though, the main level of what Rabbi Hillel accomplished in his life in serving Hashem is gar bestanden in dem, was is given an Oived Hashem. He was a tremendous servant of Hashem. He worked with himself very, very diligently to be a full, dedicated servant. Und nicht in dem, was is given an Maskel Nifla. Where he excelled was not necessarily in the fact that he was a tremendous and unusual, wise, intelligent man in his level of understanding in his connection to Hashem. That's not how his connection to Hashem expressed itself, in the haskalah, in his understanding. Rather, it was more in his diligence, in his service, of his dedication, in his behavior to Hashem, as pointed out before, his hidurim and zihirisim and so on. So how does, if so, this relate to the Masechta of Erechen that's focused primarily on the seichel, on the assessment and knowledge and understanding of the person? Is the answer to this is, as he and his son is. This is actually the whole point here. The Alter Rebbe says that one has to evaluate himself. We're not talking about the fact that one has to evaluate and use his understanding to understand godliness. Alter Rebbe says you should be evaluating yourself. When one uses his intellect to reflect upon himself, then you come to the understanding and the conclusion as Ikara Aveda is that the primary focus of your service for Hashem should not be what you understand and what's reasonable to you, nor Kabbalah soil, rather to accept upon yourself the yoke of heaven. Zayin and Oived Hashem, you come to the conclusion the main thing is the full unconditional dedication to Hashem, and that's what Rabbi Hillel came to through using the power of Erechen, the power of him assessing himself and realizing that he should be fully dedicated to Hashem. This is also expressed in the conclusion of the Masechta, which discusses this way of pledging and dedicating something to Hashem by declaring something to be cherem. At his machrim, when one declares cherem, what this includes really is nitnar din chosim. He's not only declaring his properties, his possessions, as on the top hana von nichse gashmi asylum lashon helem, that he doesn't want to have any benefit of these possessions of the physical world. The world represents concealment, disconnected of Hashem. So the person wants to disassociate from that. Cherem, when one wants to disassociate from all of this, it includes also his own faculties, that his own kaiches that Hashem gave him should not be immersed in these things of the world. And rather that they, his own kaiches of his nefesh, looking at himself to be meidach oneself, that they should be separated from the things of the world and belong to the Master, to Hashem. To the degree that this should be on the level of the Cherem Kainim as Ein Lam Pidyin. The halacha regarding the Cherem of the Kainim is, once a Yid declares something to be Cherem, it belongs to the Kain, there's no way of redeeming this. Lo Yemachav Lo Yagal. It's not sold and it's not redeemed. Now this is different than all other hektish. Every hektish that belongs to the funds of hektish, you always have the possibility to redeem it. But when you declare something to be Cherem and it belongs to the Kainim, you cannot redeem it. Which means, Zeverin Kedushas Hakov, it becomes completely holy. Something it's dedicated with no way back. Biz al derech mis given by Rabbi Hillel, and this is like it was in the life of Rabbi Hillel as mitzad geidel zehirusay and precious von an yalam haza. That is a tremendous level where we're so careful and totally separated from worldly matters. Hat sein Guf allein gefühlt was darf tun und wie darf tun. His very body itself automatically sensed exactly what he has to do and how he has to do it, without him having to pay attention and force his body to do so. He was totally and completely there, dedicated to Hashem. Und b'shas, die Anhage von Ayiden is boifin kazeh. When a Yid's behavior is in this manner, as that is machrim in yonav agashmiyim, that he gives away all of his physical powers that he has, the kachaysav aruchnim, and the spiritual powers that he has, his kaychas, his be'oifin shel kedushava avdala anal, to totally separate and give it to Hashem, is a sazayib and mekoshkein in zayin dibur kapshutay. Most definitely, this includes also his speech, which is what's relevant over here regarding the whole union of cherem, as we learned before from the chinuch, that really the term of cherem has a negative connotation. As that is nizar b'dibure b'yaiser, that he is extremely careful in the words that come out of his mouth. und es ist nicht scheich, als es soll rausgehen von seinem Meul, a Loshe von Hepech HaBrocha. And it's impossible that anything that comes out of his mouth should have any association with anything that's the opposite of blessing. As you see here, the Rebbe himself, as always, the Rebbe would say this expression of Hepech HaBrocha. On that mot is bayem rak toive v'shefa bracha, and then using the language of the chinuch, he will have only goodness and an abundance of blessing. Biz ba'ifim this is by kayanim and leviim, and then as it is by the kayanim and leviim, which we're talking about over here, that can declare this chayim, was called ish Yisrael asher nod varuchai ken detzu tzukumen. Every single yid that his spirit has this desire can reach to be like a Kayin and a Levi, lihibadl, to be separated, lamed lefnei Hashem, l'sharsev v'lavdechulu, to separate and stand in front of Hashem, to serve Him. V'zdemol tareizen is kadosh kodesh kadoshim, and then he becomes completely like the Holy of Holies. V'yiyeh Hashem l'chelka v'nachlasai, Hashem will be your portion and your inheritance, la'olam u'la'olmei alamim, forever. And then this includes all of your possessions, and obviously his very own family. That they themselves now become Sheikhin Beis Adonai of Mokim Abracha V'Chesed V'Atoiv. They are in the possession of Hashem, the place of blessing, kindness, and goodness. When as kommt up, and this comes down, it's materialized. B'Toiv Hanirva Nigle, with open and revealed good. B'Bane Chaye Mezayne Reviche, with the children and health and sustenance in the most abundant manner. V'yiratzen, may it be the will of Hashem, l'chol b'nei u'b'nei Yisrael, for all Yidden all over the world, b'chol makom shehem.